Hello everyone. The subject of this video is how to go about planning a language analysis essay for IGCSE English language. This is something that we're working on in year 10 at the moment, and the focus of the essay is analysing two texts from part 2 of the anthology. Part 2 of the anthology is these texts here. So you've got Disabled, Out Out, An Unknown Girl, The Bright Lights of Sarajevo, Still I Rise, The Story of an Hour, The Necklace, Significant Cigarettes, Whistle and I'll Come to You, and Night. Now, you have to choose two texts here to analyse. It might be that your teacher has recommended a couple of texts that you might want to do, or they might have given you a question that allows you complete free choice in choosing two texts. Now, in this essay, you do not get any marks for comparing the texts. That means you could do two very different texts if you wanted to. Still I Rise and Significant Cigarettes don't have that much in common. You could write about those two if those are your favourites. However, what we would seriously recommend is, because you're writing an essay with one question about two texts, it makes sense that those texts do have similar things in common. We would also recommend that even though you're not getting marks for comparison in this essay, if you are comparing and linking your two texts together all the way through your essay, number one, it shows that you're answering the question. Number two, it shows quite an advanced knowledge of the texts to be able to link them together. And then number three, it increases the fluency of your writing. It's quite possible for you to do a short essay on one text, a short essay on the other text, and then just put them into the same Word document. However, that won't be as fluent as a student who has taken their two texts, has planned an essay very carefully, and has written something very fluent based on that. So what we're going to have a go at today is planning an essay based on two texts from the anthology, and I'm going to show you how to do it in a comparative way. Okay, so I have made up a question this morning. How do Owen and Harrison present war in Disabled and The Bright Lights of Sarajevo? So hopefully you know those two texts fairly well by now. Disabled obviously is the first one in part 2 of the anthology here, about the young boy who loses his legs and one arm in the war, and then we see him in his military hospital, basically with no life left at all. And then obviously we have The Bright Lights of Sarajevo as well, a very documentary style poem by Tony Harrison about the siege of Sarajevo in 1992 and 1993, depicting the lives that these people lead and this couple in the middle of it all who, despite the differences and the ethnic differences and the conflict that's going on, they still find this degree of comfort with each other. So those are the two we're going to look at today. How do Owen and Harrison present war in Disabled and The Bright Lights of Sarajevo? Now, one way to plan will be on a piece of plain paper like I'm doing today. You can do it in any way you want to, but the process that I'm going to show you today should be the same. You'll obviously need your anthology with you. I suggest getting some pens and pencils and things like that as well to make your planning a more visual experience rather than just having to write loads of things down. So, let's look at this question. How do Owen and Harrison present war in Disabled and The Bright Lights of Sarajevo? Obviously, these are two poems about war. They're slightly different in the way that they're looking at it, but war is at the centre of them. And your question will 99% likely have the word how in it, and it'll probably have the word present in it. So how are these poets presenting war? Now, the first thing I always tell my students to do is to basically come up with a list of descriptive phrases that answer that question. So how do Owen and Harrison present war in Disabled and The Bright Lights of Sarajevo? And the first thing to do, I would suggest, is around your question or underneath your question, however you want to do it, is to come up with that list of adjectives. So how do they present war? Well, in both of these texts, war is presented as something that is incredibly violent, I would say. So we've got that to start off with. They also present war, I suppose, focus on the consequences of war a little bit, don't they? War has very negative consequences. A slightly easy idea, I suppose, but start with the easy ones, and then as you get into it and as you get to know the text a bit better, maybe you'll come up with something even better. One of the other consequences of war in both of these poems is that war dehumanizes people. It takes away their basic humanity. It turns them into people who can't really live anymore. Let's add a word in here. War is violent and bloody. I was just thinking about that image in the bright lights of Sarajevo of the blood-dunked crusts of shredded bread. Now, I've got 3 ideas there, and suddenly I've come up against a bit of a brick wall, so I need to go back to the poems. I need to have a look through. How are they presenting war? So we've got the consequences of war going on here, which I've kind of mentioned. The negative consequences of war. And then in the second stanza, Owen talks about the past, doesn't he, when everything was happier. Is there a similar idea in the bright lights of Sarajevo, perhaps, of the idea of the poets presenting war as something that changes reality? Yeah? In Disabled, the reality of the soldier has completely changed from how it was in his youth. Here, the opening stanza of The Bright Lights of Sarajevo has this list of these terrible things that the people of Sarajevo have to go through: queuing up, dodging snipers, being rationed. So, nice idea. War is something that changes reality for us. How else is war presented? Is war presented as something that can kill? Yes, it is. Is it presented as something that can divide or destroy? I think so. Let's put that down. War is presented as something that destroys and divides. We could have shrunk that down to just one adjective, I suppose, that war is destructive. So, we've got that war dehumanises, it's violent, it has negative consequences, it's something that destroys and divides, it changes reality. Let's look on the flip side of things. Are there differences in how these two poets present war? I think there are. In The Bright Lights of Sarajevo, ironically, war can bring people together. Obviously, it doesn't really do that in Disabled, but it certainly does in The Bright Lights of Sarajevo. So, let's imagine then that these are all of our ideas that we're going to come up with for this essay. That means we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at least main paragraphs there in our essay. That's fantastic. We'll have a short introduction, a short conclusion eventually, and our 6 main ideas. Now, what you then need to do in a plan is start thinking about the detail. What else can you add in that's going to make this a decent essay? We'll talk a little bit later on about how we change some of these ideas that we've got into topic sentences. But first, let's look at the detail of it all. So, I'm going to do it poem by poem. I'm going to look at Disabled, first of all, and look at how that deals with each of these ideas that I've come up with. So, I have said that war or dehumanises in disabled. Well, how does it dehumanise? Let's look. We have this idea that the boy threw away his knees. And he's obviously now legless as well. So we've got these two key quotations. How else is he dehumanised? He will never feel again how slim girls' waists are. We could talk about the ghastly suit of grey. There's tons of ideas in there that we could bring out. We could look here at the end of the poem. He noticed how the women's eyes passed from him to the strong men that were whole. Yeah, so legless, threw away his knees. Now we might put in here that that's a metaphor. You can't literally throw away your knees, so it's a metaphorical phrase, isn't it? A figurative phrase, which hopefully you've covered in class. The word legless, this horrible blunt language used to describe his dehumanised state. So, war is violent and bloody. Let's look for that in disabled. I think the bit we might need to focus on here is the leap of purple. That we could talk about. The leap of purple that spurted from his thigh. Again, we've got a metaphor here, haven't we? The leap of purple. A figurative, not literal description of something. The leap of purple is supposed to describe blood, isn't it? This metaphor is very vivid, and in an essay we might talk about that and the impact of that on the reader. What other image of violence and blood do we have in this poem? Perhaps we could look at the fact that he poured, now in the poem it's it, isn't it? Poured it down shell holes, but we could add in a little square bracket and clarify it for the examiner. We mean his blood, don't we? He poured his blood down shell holes. Till the veins ran dry. Again, we're in metaphor land here. Poured his blood down shell holes till the veins ran dry. I mean, he didn't pour the blood himself, did he? It's metaphorical. Again, it's vivid. And also, something that we might talk about in this essay is that it seems that Owen is blaming the soldier for this. That he did the pouring. He poured his own blood away. He is to blame for what happened. So we've got a couple of pieces of evidence for the dehumanisation in disabled, a couple of pieces of evidence for it being incredibly violent and bloody. Before we look at some of the other ideas, let's see if we can do the same for the bright lights of Sarajevo then. So, here is the bright lights of Sarajevo. Where are people dehumanised in this poem? Let's have a look. I think one of the most chilling images in the poem is that bit where they have empty canisters of gas in their prams. So let's use that. Empty canisters. Where is it? Of gas. Spell it properly. And then we're going to just put little square brackets, dot, 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 because I don't want all of that bit about getting refills. I just want empty canisters of gas. They wheel home in prams. Obviously, this image is particularly chilling because what you would expect to see in a pram is new life, a little baby, a little child. And what we have in Sarajevo is that these people have been dehumanised. Their humanity has been taken away, so that all we get are actually gas canisters, this horrible, grim image of the reality of surviving in war. So the empty canisters of gas they wheel home in prams. We might talk about that in terms of it being another example of dehumanisation in the bright lights of Sarajevo. The empty canisters of gas they wheel home in prams. Could we use perhaps the streets that have been destroyed? Could we use the dodging of the snipers? Let's go with that. Can't spell today. Dodging snipers on the way. Showing us the grim reality of life. That's no way for humans to live, dodging snipers on the way, as if they're just animals, something like that. So, let's move on to this idea of war being violent and bloody. We've got these very vivid metaphors used in Disabled. What could we say about the bright lights of Sarajevo? Perhaps we could use the blood-dumped crusts of shredded bread here on line 31. Certainly a very bloody image. Blood-dumped crusts of shredded bread. And what are we going to say about that? We're going to talk about how vivid it is, shocking. But like we've done here with Disabled, we've picked out the metaphor, we've picked out the blunt language, we've picked out the unexpected image. Is there a particular poetic technique at work here? I would say there is. Your teacher might have mentioned this, but if they haven't, we have these plosive sounds. Now, plosive sounds are the ones that you make by kind of just forcing air out of your mouth and making a dum or a bum or a puh sound. So blood-dumped crusts of shredded bread. Lots of plosive sounds, almost perhaps imitating the violence that has caused these crusts of shredded bread to be covered in blood. Yeah, the dropping of bombs, which in itself is a plosive word. Blood-dumped crusts of shredded bread. Lovely. Do we have any more images of violence and blood, perhaps? I think so. Let's look on line 42. Let's add in this idea of the death deep. Death dark wells. We could look at the alliteration here. Alliteration of plosive sounds, in fact. Death deep, death dark wells. And it really, as a line, this highlights the loss and the violence of it all, doesn't it? Death deep, death dark wells. He's describing the shell holes there that are now filled with water. So, for the rest of your plan, you would do exactly the same thing. You take each of your little adjectival descriptive statements that answer the question, how is war presented? It changes reality, it has negative consequences, it can bring people together in some circumstances, it destroys us and it divides us. So you do the same for each. You'd come up with your idea for Disabled, you'd come up with your idea for the bright lights of Sarajevo. Now, importantly, what I've got for each of my ideas is key. I have quotations, don't I? Plenty of them, in fact. The mark of a good essay is going to be a good amount of nicely embedded, fluently explored quotations. So if in each of my paragraphs at the moment, let's imagine I'm doing a paragraph about the dehumanising effects of war, I've already got 1, 2, 3, 4 different quotations. I might embed some more as I'm exploring and going into detail. I can talk about the grim reality of it, I can talk about the unexpected image, I can talk about it shocking the reader, I can talk about metaphor, I can talk about blunt language, all in that one paragraph. So, that's the key thing to do. Once you've got your key ideas, move on. Look at each text in turn, bring out your evidence from the text, make a brief note to yourself of how that quotation might be working. Now that is probably going to have come from the lessons that you've had, from the notes you've made on the poem. Feel free, if you're getting stuck with some of these ideas, get yourself on Google, get yourself on Firefly. Have a look at some of the resources that have been provided for you and the resources that other people have come up with online. Now, let's say we'd completed the whole thing and we'd had our pink and our green for both of the poems all the way round. You'd have a ton of information. The next thing to do is to try and work out how to create topic sentences out of what you've got. So, get my red pen here. So let's take this as the first idea that we looked at, the dehumanisation of war. And we need to come up with a topic sentence for this. So once you've got your plan, nice and organised like that, we then need to start making our topic sentences for the essay. Topic sentences are important because they help you to create a clear argument, and if you've got a clear argument and a good critical style, then you're on the way to getting good marks, basically. So let's try and create a topic sentence out of the dehumanising effects of war. Our question, obviously, how do they present war? So the easy way to do any topic sentence is just to reverse that question. War is presented as a dehumanising thing. Would be the first thing that might pop into your head. But, I mean, that's okay. It's not amazingly brilliant, is it? Let's see if we can improve it by using the names of the poets. My class will know, and my classes will know, that I'm always going on at you about using the names of the poets or playwrights or the novelist, whoever it might be, that you're trying to explore. So, Owen and Harrison present war as a dehumanising thing. I mean, that's okay, it's better because it's got the names of the poets there, nicely embedded, but it's this dehumanising thing, that's not great, is it? We've still got present war, or war is presented, that's key. Let's add in a comparative element. Both Owen and Harrison present the dehumanising impacts of war in their poems. Now, there we go. That topic sentence perfectly captures what I'm going to go on and talk about in the rest of the paragraph based on the key things that I've got. The dehumanising impacts in disabled. The soldier his humanity is literally taken away, isn't it? He's thrown away his knees. He is legless, like some kind of object. Here we've got the people in the bright lights of Sarajevo dodging snipers like they're innocent little creatures, like they're animals. The other dehumanising impact of war for them is that life seems to have stopped, and survival, the empty canisters of gas that they use to heat their homes, survival has replaced just normal life, prams and babies and children. So, we don't need that one anymore. We don't need that one either. And here's one of our topic sentences. Perfect. All we need to do then is add in these key ideas here. So, there is one way of going about planning one of these language coursework essays. Feel free to do it in any way that works best for you. You can use images, pictures, use a Word document, use PowerPoint, use blank pieces of paper like this, use a flowchart if that helps. I like this one because it's nice and visual. Colour code it if you like, so you've got your key ideas, which, as we've seen, will turn into topic sentences. We've got our key quotations about both texts, and then we've got our little notes about how we're going to explore them. And those little notes, depending on how you work and how good you think you are, they can be quite short. Like here, I've just reminded myself that, okay, I'm going to need to talk about the impact of the metaphor there. Down here, where I've mentioned the death deep, death dark wells, I've gone a bit further. I've almost jotted down what it is that I'm going to put in to my essay. That the alliteration here highlights the loss and the violence that Harrison's going to convey. Once you've finished your plan, I recommend going back through it, checking it carefully. I've already spotted there, for some reason I've put in an apostrophe there, which doesn't need to be there, but then again, it is early in the morning. So,